This session, 1 year after the riots, attempts to kickstart a broader discussion on both the causes and the responses to last August's riots. To my immediate left, we're very delighted to have the Right Honourable David Lammy, MP for Tottenham. David served 9 years between 2009 and 2010 as a minister in the last Labour government and was made a Privy Councillor in 2008. He is now an active backbench MP, and he was telling me earlier that he's going straight on the demonstration after this session. He's also the author of a highly recommended book called Out of the Ashes, which I do recommend you buy and read, Britain After the Riots, a book about the reasons behind the 2011 riots and what has been done to prevent them happening ever again. I think David is perhaps one of the few MPs who has taken the implications of the riots and what it meant very seriously, and as such we're extremely pleased and delighted that he can attend and contribute to this important day. Next we have the prolific Guardian columnist, writer and author Zoe Williams on my immediate right. Prior to writing for The Guardian in 2000, she was a columnist on the Evening Standard and also writes for the Sunday Telegraph, along with Marie Claire, Good Housekeeping and various other women's titles that either attempt to smash patriarchy or at least give it a good makeover. She is the author of one non-fiction book, What Not to Expect When You're Expecting. Finally, we have Professor Frank Furedi. Frank Furedi is probably one of the most widely quoted sociologists in the country. He has produced a series of agenda-setting books, such as The Culture of Fear and Paranoid Parenting, and countless articles that provide an authoritative, lively account of key developments in contemporary cultural life. His latest book is on tolerance, and Furedi regularly comments on radio and television, appearing on Newsnight, Sky, BBC News, the Today programme, Moral Maze, and a variety of other radio television shows. We look forward to Frank's unique insights onto last year's riots. So can we give our panellists a warm welcome, please? Okay, David.
I think it's probably important to say right from the beginning that all riots, whether they are in Paris, Watts in LA, Brixton, Bradford, Birmingham, Tottenham, begin with a spark. And the spark for this riot was obviously the shooting of Mark Duggan in Tottenham. And that is an ongoing wound in relation to the quest for what happened, what really took place, and the truth and the answers that his parents and the wider community need. And in fact, I was talking about that in Parliament yesterday. But sometimes when things happen, you get commentators and journalists turn up, not fantastic commentators and journalists like Zoe Williams. But in August, a lot of our good journalists are on holiday. And they tend to try, and in those first early days, write up the story last time round. And I saw some commentary that was beginning to write these riots up as a race riot. And then people got a bit stuck because as riots took place across the country, and you saw black, brown and white people rioting and looting, the story felt very different. And so I think my first assertion would be that what took place last August was deeply profound. And also to assert that I think that we are living through an age of unrest. Riots and recession go together. And indeed, whether it is Occupy in one place, student protest in another, and indeed more chaotic, frenzied rioting, those are the times we're living in. And just a few weeks ago, riots taking place in Spain, we've got to ask profound questions about where we are. I found myself in the Commons from about 2010 onwards, predicting on 3 occasions that I thought that there would be unrest or riots. That wasn't an easy thing to do, and I was careful about how I put my remarks, so I didn't want to be accused of inciting riots. But I started to write my book years before these riots took place, because I was growing increasingly concerned that we have a political class, and that is not just our politicians, but it's also our journalists, our judges, who tend to live in Muswell Hill or Notting Hill, and seem very far removed from some of the issues that face my constituents, but also constituents very different from them across the country. So my framework for this discussion is the following, that we've had two revolutions in the 20th century. The first revolution was the social liberal revolution of the 1960s. It's the revolution that brings almost more women to this room than men. It's the revolution that brings me here as an ethnic minority. It's at its best the revolution we associate with people like Gandhi, Mandela, Martin Luther King. It's the revolution that brings us that search for who we are, the freedom to be individuals and to self-determine in the 20th and 21st century. It's the revolution that brings us rights. And I stand by all those struggles to get us to a place where we can assert who we are, what we want to be in the world. However, in 2012, if we're just aware of our rights and not of our responsibilities, we're in trouble. And there's something that connects that person that smashes into a window of Foot Locker to get that pair of trainers because it's my right to them, to that banker who sees it's his right to that 12 million bonus, to that journalist who thinks it's their right to listen to your voicemail, to that MP who thinks it's their right to have a duck house in modern-day Britain. And then you get the second revolution. This is the other liberal revolution, the economic liberal revolution of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and to some extent continued by Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Gordon Brown. And I hope I don't have to explain to this audience where that's landed us. Basically, revolution that says you can make as much money as you want, however you want. There's the liberal in that. And where that leads us to is a place now where we have a housing crisis for lots of people. We have 56% of young black youth in this city currently unemployed, alongside mass unemployment for young people. We have a real struggle for ordinary folk to make a living wage. I can think of a 15-year-old girl in my constituency who was caught looting very early on. She wasn't a very good looter. And the judge said in those early days, where are her parents? Because they weren't in court. He thought her parents were feckless, and the Daily Mail covered this as if her parents were feckless, reckless. They weren't there. In fact, her parents were working. They're the kind of parents that work. Mum's a dinner lady during the afternoon and a cleaner at night. Dad's a minicab driver during the day and a security guard at night. These are people who can't be there for their kids because they can't make a living wage in London. So for me, that's the context. And it's into that context, those two liberalisms, one of which I stand by, but presents us with challenges to establish responsibility and a collective sense that I think the riots occur. And are we dealing with the problems? Is the government dealing with the problems? My God, no. No. In some areas, they're making them worse.
OK, thank you very much. Zoe.
I did exactly this conversation in March in the Guardian Open House weekend, only then I was chairing, which is a role I prefer because I don't know the answer. Then Camilla Batman-Gillard was saying, we're definitely going to have more riots. Wait for the Olympics. Just you wait. I know what the word on the streets is. It's all going to kick off. And Jessie Norman was saying, no, it's actually all fine. And most people are really getting on with things and behaving very well. I mean, I thought Camilla might be right. I knew Jessie was wrong. Camilla, it turned out, was wrong as well. It's not that easy to predict riots. And even though there's a kind of established formula, there's an established multiplier for when unrest might happen, the fact that nobody actually knows until it does happen shows how bad a kind of indicator it is. It's a necessary but insufficient precondition for rioting. So Runciman did all this work about what would create an Arab Spring, what a country would have to look like in order to depose a leader that had been there for 30 years. And what he found was that, well, I mean, it might have been him and 500 other academics. What was found overall was that it's really straightforward. It's about the age of the population and the GDP per head. And that's across a nation. So if you want to know whether Egypt will overthrow Mubarak, you just count the people, count how old they are, count how much money they've got. And that, of course, plays down in specific populations. So if you want to know whether a council estate's going to kick off, you do the same thing. And there was the field geographers in Sheffield, the year before, in 2010, they actually got a project funded where they sent loads of PhD students down to watch riots. Unfortunately, no riots occurred, and they had to go home. And then, of course, they didn't do it the year after. This is just how difficult it is to predict. The point is, if you know that poverty is a precondition, but you know that isn't enough to make it happen, and, sure, the shooting of Mark Duggan was a catalyst, but anything can be a catalyst. At the time, one thing I thought was interesting was people were saying this is like a prison riot. So there is, prisoners can find a catalyst anywhere. They can find a catalyst in their underpants. But I didn't mean that. Anyway, they can find any kind of perceived slight to a prisoner's pride can start a prison riot. So what you want to look for is not the event, the triggering event, because the triggering event could be anything, but the kind of atmosphere in which a triggering event will turn into that. And that the atmosphere, I think, is the salient point now. Not really so much in terms of rights and responsibilities, but in terms of privatisation of public space. So if everything is monetised, if every space is advertised, if there's no such thing as a kind of civic space that isn't a place to buy or sell, then people who are kind of cut out of the buying or selling will find it much more frustrating than they normally would. Now, my worry at the moment is that there's such a kind of ideologically driven politics that nobody even wants to have the initial conversation about whether or not poverty could possibly cause a riot. And this is holding everything back so much that it's very difficult to get anywhere. And I was amazed. I went to the steering committee. I'm going to pretend that it was off the record, but mainly because I can't remember the two MPs' names. But they were talking about whether or not it was poor parenting. And they said exactly, they were making exactly the point this judge was making, where were the parents? Why didn't they keep the kids in? And I said exactly what David would have said, which is, well, maybe they were working too long hours. There's the only people who work hours too long to parent effectively are people who are being paid too much and people who are being paid too little. Nobody else would bother. And everybody, the whole room said, well, we don't want to get too ideological. As if, even having a conversation about how much people were getting paid in these households was too ideological, and you had to keep everything on a very kind of practical level. Exactly the same conversation that happened 5 minutes later. They were saying, well, why aren't they keeping the kids in? And somebody else said, well, you've got to look at housing conditions. If housing conditions are very poor, then people won't want to keep their whole families in. If they won't want to keep their 15-year-olds around the house. And again, the chair said, can we just keep this non-ideological just to kind of establish the parameters of the steering committee? So it literally, let's ask some questions to prevent this happening again, but let's not ask any large questions. And actually, it's a situation in which the failure to ask large questions will result in some incredibly stupid ideas. The idea that you can pin this on parents and then start a parenting course in which you teach parents of 15-year-olds how not to riot is absolutely preposterous. And yet I can see that coming out of this kind of narrative. If you do refute large causes, then you end up with a lot of very niche, weird causes. The other thing they were saying was, you're going to like this, they said it's the media, watching the media, legitimised the riots for young people and spurred them on to riot more. And so I did a little tiny bit of market testing, and I went to Pimlico Academy and just said, what media did anybody watch during the riots? And they were going, what? And I was going, well, did you watch Channel 4 or the BBC? And they were laughing in my face. I mean, the idea that there's this cadre of 15-year-olds sitting watching the mainstream news going, oh, that looks like fun. I might try that in Liverpool. It certainly looks like fun in Wandsworth. So there's a massive kind of gap. There's a gulf of understanding, which again is this kind of, are they in Notting Hill or are they, is the ruling class completely... It's not so much do they know what's going on. It's more a case of, are they interested in finding out what's going on, or would they prefer to build this into a narrative in which poor people are coincidentally also feral. And I think that's what you've got to watch. Is there a deliberate attempt to build this into a different narrative?
Okay, thank you very much, Zoe. Frank?
Probably the thing that disturbed me more about the riots was not the riots, but the reaction to it, mainly because the thing that I find very uneasy is that almost every interpretation of the riots I heard were interpretations based on people's agendas and their ideas that they already knew before the riots occurred. And if you had strong objections to the MP's sort of pay scandal, then it was British selfishness. If you thought that it was horrible parents destroying the British way of life, then it was sort of dysfunctional families. And you could almost tell in advance what people were going to say that the riots were about without even knowing anything about the riots at all. And I find that extremely disturbing that you could literally know what people would say because they weren't looking at the riots. They already had an agenda to promote as a way of pointing finger. And as Zoe said, it was a very ideological discussion. It's always ideological, but usually there's an attempt at least a semblance of reflection, whereas this time there wasn't. So what I thought I would do today is to use the same standard of criticism on myself as I use on other people and say, well, after a year, do you still think what you thought at that time? Has anything changed to give you a different perspective? Because the world today isn't like it was predicted it would be. As Zoe said, people were saying there would be riots, and other people have said that this would happen. Well, now I think we're in a much clearer position to see what's really going on. And it seems to me that looking at it a year back, it's very clear that all the explanations of the riots were written by people who were both out of touch, but also who were ideologically obsessed with seeing what they wanted to see. I mean, I'm in a privileged position of being both a sociologist, but also being a participant observer in about 4 riots in my lifetime. From being an 18-year-old kid getting involved in riots in Montreal, all the way to the last one where I was in the middle, it was Brixton, which is now a long time ago. But the one thing that you know when you're in a real riot is that it is powerful. There's a kind of an indefined dynamic to it. There's a kind of passion that people get caught up with. People think that this is the most important moment in their life. It's a defining moment when you're involved in something like this. I thought at the time when these riots occurred, that contrary, and I was always in a minority of one, I thought that this is a riot that is strangely empty of emotion. I mean, people said all the kids are really angry. And, what I found, walking around Wood Green, as people were going shopping, is this kind of routine-like casualness with which people were approaching. There was no anger there. There was no powerful emotion. None of the kind of the raw gut reactions that you get in real riots. And I think what you had was for the media cameras, this performance, this ritual of anger. Oh man, we are very, very angry, and this is what's going on. And then all the commentators would then amplify that, sort of 10 or 20 times. And I think that struck me at the time. I couldn't really put a word to it. I could put a word to it now. Is a kind of public life that's become emptied of real meaning. That's what it was, because as David says, there is a spark, but the spark is never the cause. It is really a condition of something else. So the spark is not very useful to look at that specific instance. But when you look at it afterwards, you can see there were many different riots, because Liverpool wasn't what happened in North London. They're all there. There are different kind of dynamics. But the one thing that they had in common was a public life that was really bereft of meaning. And in particular, it seems to me was really important, what struck you, particularly not being English myself, is this real sort of ebbing away of what used to be called solidarity. There's a tradition, particularly in working class communities, that even if you make trouble, you don't make it in your own home. You don't shit in your own front door, basically. That's not what you do. You might go and do it somewhere else. But what people were doing in many parts of England was precisely sort of doing that in their own space in a way that is really very rare. I saw a bit of it in France recently, where some of the riots occurred in some of the banlieues. They were a little bit like it, but not to the extreme, not in the extreme way that was the case in England. And I think that what we're really seeing here is a very deep problem of solidarity. And when I was writing about the riots about a year ago, I was really overwhelmed by that. And I had this one experience where I live in a very small town in Faversham in Kent, and I remember walking from the train station and talking to this couple of old ladies who live down the road, and they were all saying, well, what if the kids in Faversham draw the same conclusion as other parts, and what if our lives will be insecure. And this is a totally, safe, secure kind of environment. And the fact that they were thinking like that, it wasn't stupid, because they were aware of the fact that if you're an old person in Faversham, you really have been outsourced to another world. Ordinary people ignore you. You feel relatively insecure. And I think it is this question of solidarity or lack of solidarity that is really at the heart of it. And in an indirect sense, it does relate to parenting, not because parenting is an issue one way or the other, because as we all know, you can have parents that work 24 hours a day and still be great mothers and fathers. It's not a quantitative issue. It relates indirectly to parenting insofar as there's been this association of generational relationships, where we live in a world where adults, and this goes across classes in all communities, somehow imagine that young people are other people's responsibility, that it's the teacher will sort it out, or the social worker will deal with it, or some professional will come in and basically put things right. And you have a situation where kids, growing up 5, 6, and it is as young as that, 5 or 6, know that whatever they do, that adult is not going to say anything. I mean, and it's not their fault, it's our fault as adults, because we've basically somehow switched off from this whole kind of process. And to me, I think the consequences of this is this. There isn't a riot. This summer there wasn't a riot, as Zoe said. What we did have is almost something else that is an inverted form of those riots, which is almost like a desperate attempt to find solidarity. And I think in England what has happened is that there's a desperate desire to reach out and to feel that we're one community. But the way that we do it is in a kind of almost, pathology is too strong a word, a kind of a mawkish kind of a way. So the little girl gets kidnapped, and all of a sudden it's the national news and everybody, sort of stops. We put down flowers, we kind of pause on it. A week, there are these ritualistic search parties that go out that basically are a performance for the kind of cameras. And that's how we know we're decent people, because we partake in that. Or this Jimmy Savile business at the moment. All of a sudden everybody's got this incredibly strong views about this individual. We're not like him. And there's a kind of mawkish desire. And this is the only way at the moment that we're able to begin to connect to each other. Not by looking to the future, not by looking towards life within our community, but somehow finding these permissible spaces within which we can affirm our decency, that we belong to a similar kind of environment. And I think in that sense, the issues that were raised by the riots continue. But it is not really about selfishness, and it's not really about poverty. It's not about economic issues. It's not about parenting. It's not that kind of moral issue. I mean, it's all of those things as well, because you need to have those kind of elements of dissatisfaction, but it's about solidarity. History shows us that when poor people, working class people, have solidarity, they don't riot. That is the experience. They don't riot. And if they do riot, they do it somewhere else, where it pays to riot, in a sense, in terms of making an impact. I think we do need to make a distinction between the forms of rioting that have an economic and a social dynamism to it in the past, and the more emptying out of public space, that kind of introversion that has occurred, where even the emotions or the anger that is associated with hatred for the system, for the way that you are, seems to have acquired this kind of commodified, sort of taken for granted, predictable kind of form.
Thanks, Frank. David, in your book, you talked about how you admitted that the Labour Party in the 2000s were, if you like, tried to nationalise society, which I thought was a really useful way of looking at politics during that period. And you recognised that there were problems with the relentless nannying and state intervention on a very sort of small level on people's lives. But where I got slightly confused is that I think towards the end of your book, and a lot of commentators have made similar points, that there's almost like a call for further state intervention.
Okay, well, let me just assert a couple of things. And there's some definitions have come up. The first thing is the working class. We're having this context, or this debate, in a context in which less and less people in this country self-define as working class. More and more people, and I suspect most of the people in this room, no offence, are middle class or would say they're middle class. Someone said that you have to have a cafetiere to define yourself as middle class. That definitely makes me middle class. And that is important because, of course, sadly, that has deep repercussions on our political system, where there's this fight for the middle ground, this fight for votes in Swindon, in Luton, in Peterborough, this fight for the working, for effectively the middle class. Then what else is going on in society? There's this terrible language around a feral underclass. It's bad, horrible language, because you should never describe human beings as feral, rodents, effectively. The term underclass is actually borrowing from the Indian caste system, and again is an offensive, horrible term that we should turn our back on. But what is really going on? What are people searching for? My view is the real description is a workless poor. And that workless poor isn't represented politically very easily in our country. And it's that workless poor that you saw most often on the streets. But here's the dilemma. There are some in Wales, in Yorkshire, where there weren't riots, in cities like Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, Hull, Knowsley, just outside Liverpool, some of the poorest places in our country where there were no riots. But you can run a pretty powerful argument that people were so oppressed, so poor, so workless, that they didn't have the energy to get up and riot. Don't delude yourself that just because people weren't moving around and rioting that all is well in those cities. It's not. So there's this phenomenon of the workless poor. And where I often talk about state intervention, it's in relation to that group of people, which I think is a deep, deep problem across major developed economies. And let me just say that that problem existed under Labour. We just described them as NEETs. They're a group of people for whom there is no employment in this economy that has largely hitched itself to finance and service, which is basically retail, which is the deal that Margaret Thatcher did in the 1980s and which we now need to extract ourselves from. What I said about Labour is that in looking at modern-day capitalism and the inheritance, if you like, of the Thatcher-Reagan period, what we determined is that we could use the state to ameliorate some of the harsher edges of this reality. So, rather than take on the food and drinks industry for not labelling and polluting our bodies, let's lose the NHS to help people feel better. Rather than take on big companies that won't pay people a living wage and chief execs that think it's okay to earn 500 times more than the guy on the factory floor, let's use the tax credit system to pay people a bit more. Rather than getting into that terrible, difficult morass of culturally what's happening in Britain, let's pass more crime legislation in 13 years than the previous 100. We ended office with 600 performance indicators, with targets, with measures everywhere. And whilst many of those were done for very good reasons, the truth is we believed passionately in public services but lost a sense of public spirit. The left, as is often the case when they're kicked out of office, start to overdo its perception that the state can fix every problem. And this blights all centre-left parties in developed countries. We even lost, and this is very problematic, I think, when you think about where Labour comes from in this country, the solidarity that was so eloquently described previously, we even lost the language to talk about family. You know, we would say things like, we lifted 100,000 kids out of child poverty, when actually it's parents that lift kids out of poverty on the whole. It's not the state. So I think my analysis for Labour, my challenge for Labour was, even if actually we wanted to do that, we haven't got the money to do it anymore. So there's something about neighbourhood, community, family life, about what is culturally going on that we need to challenge. There's something about those tower blocks that reign across our cities, when most architects, commentators understand that some of these buildings are not fit for purpose, they're still there. And having spent a lot of time growing up in one, I can tell you it wasn't great. So it's that workless poor that's the challenge. It's some of these new cultural norms that have come in where we have to, whether it's a collective, a solidarity, whatever the word is, we have to come together again. And then it's the technological ways in which our culture's changed, driven by the internet. This was a riot that took place largely on BBM and Twitter. The commercialisation that's rampant amongst young people's lives. And I was also suggesting very strongly that, if you're middle class, growing up, liking a bit of gangster rap, liking a bit of grime, it's all fine. Because there's other things going on in your life. Often a private or public school that's bringing in other elements. Parents that are taking you to this theatre, that museum, this thing. If you're poor, and that's the diet you're getting, day after day after day, on the 15th floor of a tower block in Tottenham or Brixton, believe me, the dangers of the misogyny and the shallow consumerism that's being fed to you is deeply problematic. And I think that how we collect around those issues in modern society is a profound challenge.
Okay, question for you, Zoe. Just something that you were saying on your introduction. I mean, I was asked this quite a lot regarding, are we going to see a return to the riots? A lot of the comments from last year that the riots itself were not political, but the context was. So if there's this all-pervading context, a political context, which would cause a riot, how would we explain the lack of a riot?
I guess you would explain that with the Olympics. I mean, I just want to come back on a couple of things. I don't think the Labour Party did nationalise society. I think they privatised society, and I've just done this huge project. Well, I mean, it's unbelievable. When you look at every single public service for the last 20 years, it's all been privatised. Adult social care is 89% privatised. Children's homes are 76% privatised. Everything is privatised apart from children's centres, ironically, which are the only things that are actually working. There was a huge move to privatise actual space in schools. So even before the Academies programme, the sponsors were allowed to kind of colonise public spaces like that. The kind of perceptions of space as civic space have completely disappeared because they have largely been sponsored or left to rack and ruin. And I think the Labour Party did believe in public services, but they also commissioned them out. So they were effectively privatised. And this is what created the workless poor. I mean, there's 1.75 million people in care work, but 60% of them are foreign born. Why? Because they're not getting the minimum wage. So if you can claim benefits, you'd be idiotic not to. There's no point doing work that you can't subsist on, and the thing which has driven wages down is an overweening private sector. This, so to kind of look at it and say, well, we're always going to have the workless poor, we don't have the work for the workless poor. We won't have the work for the workless poor if we don't pay for work. I mean, that's a simple economic fact. So I'm really sceptical about this kind of, there being a kind of state answer where you just love bomb the workless poor and say, okay, we're going to do interventions, we're going to make you feel good, we're going to give you youth centres. You can't love bomb them. You need to create an economy that works. Otherwise, you can't live with systemic unemployment.
No, but so, I mean, do you recognise just the way that, I mean, the reference of David of nationalising society, not in that old Labour sense of, nationalising industries, but at least a kind of tightly regulation of behaviour whereby people's autonomy has been systematically undermined. I mean, and if the state has undermined people so much, you don't look to other people, you don't look to your local community.
I don't think it's undermined them by telling them, I mean, let's look at what the Labour Party actually did to nationalise society. So there was I know David's kind of into family policy and the whole anti-smacking stuff, and the government thinking it can intercede between the parent and the child and do a better job. I don't think that has as much impact on a person as not being able to make a living. I think this is really key. I think the idea that your sense of responsibility towards your compatriots would be sapped by a government telling you that you weren't a good parent because you didn't do enough on the floor time is not what actually changes your relationship to the people around you. sure, if you're living in an economy where you're basically, any work you do has to be topped up by the government, and I understand working family tax credits as an attempt at redistribution, but it was also a subsidisation of corporate super profit. Right. So you understand, that's the point. You understand your work as just a kind of fun, as just a kind of occupation for you, and your actual money is going to come from the state. That is going to have an impact on your sense of responsibility, because you're not going to see yourself as an agent in the world.
Frank, in your summing up conclusions, you talked about the decline of solidarity, and that's something that I definitely recognise. I mean, do you tend to view how David has suggested that perhaps too much freedom as a result of the 60s had undermined solidarity and had led to that more atomistic society?
Well, obviously, being a 1960s person, I think that everything happened there was great, and I also happen to think that freedom is always the logical sort of foundation for solidarity, equality. People, who don't choose to be equal and to solidarize are really slaves of other people's passions. So I don't think that the 60s is something that we should be blaming. In fact, it's interesting that historically it was the Tory right that used to get obsessed about all the freedom of the 60s that happened there, and now it's kind of mutated into an all-party ideological, sort of kind of reaction. And I don't think that's a problem. I do think there are a couple of problems. One is structural. I think David talked about the way that the securitization and the financialization of economic life has led to the destruction of jobs and industry, which would have happened anyway, but much lower given the nature of global competition, and that's been a huge problem. There's also a link to that slight cultural problem, which is the fact that people, sort of, especially from poorer communities, have not had the kind of dynamic under which they live, which kind of creates more of a work-oriented life. I mean, I experienced that in my time in Faversham. In Faversham, we had recently 15,000 immigrants, roughly, come into Faversham in the area. They all got jobs, every single one of them. Either they work for themselves or they pick fruit or whatever, and they do the job that nobody else would do. And when I go to my gym, it's a white gym, it's all working-class white gym, and they complain about the East Europeans taking our jobs away that nobody else was doing. And Faversham is now run by Asian middle-class people. I mean, they have all the professional kind of jobs. And there are Eastern European people doing the shit work, sort of. And then a lot of English people who are, sort of looking at their shoelaces and complaining about, I'm not blaming, but I'm just saying that there is that element as well. And I think where the state is important, because I think that the state can do a lot of good and it can do a lot of bad. It's done a lot of bad, principally by, sort of undermining the conditions where community solidarity could flourish. So, for example, if you take family policy, I'm a big believer that one of the things that a good state can do is provide the infrastructure for child rearing. And in a civilized society, you would have, 24-hour-a-day childcare provision, proper, so that people can maintain their independence, they can work, they can do whatever they feel. I think Finland is a great place. In Finland, you even have access to childcare if you're a woman that doesn't work. Your mother, you don't work, you can still do it.
Yeah, that
right?
is good.
I think it's a great idea. Now, in this country, what we have instead is Sure Start and sort of program. And if you look at Sure Start, its main focus is social engineering. It's about
getting them.
Well, it's actually about getting parents to be different than they are. And a lot of what Sure Start does, I think, is a waste of time.
But the thing is, on paper, everybody says that about Sure Start. But when you actually experience a Sure Start centre, it is just somewhere you can go and hang out.
It is. But when you talk to the women afterwards, they also tell you that this is what I tell them and this is what I think. And they do feel there's a kind of cursive element where they've got to fall in line with the narrative that's kind of expected of them. And I don't see why we just can't say, well, look, we live in this town. Here's this wonderful nursery. Bring your kids in. We can build a community around it. You decide what you want to do, not us. And that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking that the people decide how they want to use those facilities rather than these professionals coming in and who already know what these people need and giving them little lectures about every aspect of life, from how they should brush their teeth to sort of how they should relate to their husband. So I think that there are those kind of problems. And I think the cumulative effect of that is that we have the worst of both worlds. I mean, we have the worst from all angles. We have sort of unnecessary cultural pressures created, which makes it difficult to really feel that you're part of a society where you can have the possibility of making your own way. And then we have this economic, sort of problem. And I tell my students to read Machiavelli, because I think Machiavelli already warned a very long time ago that the way you destroy a republic and the way you discuss a public ethos is by hiring mercenaries. I mean, that's a very old point. If you hire mercenaries, sort of, why would you want to fight for your republic? And I think Labour and Tories have done that. And we're ending up, privatizing the wrong things and not giving freedom to people in the other areas. Yeah. So it's the worst of both worlds, where wrong things are privatized, and we're not giving people the opportunity to explore their own way in the world.
I should read Machiavelli.
No, I'm going to take it out to the audience.
So your 14-year-old girl, David, who was in court, or 15, who was in court by herself, she presumably feels that she's got it worse than her parents. And I don't know whether her parents would be self-pitying or not. I mean, they have their whole... Yes, they're working incredibly hard and very long hours. But I doubt that they or their parents' generations really, in their heart of hearts, feel that their daughter has got it worse than they have. But it's that attitude and outlook which I think we have, as an adult society, have fed to the young generation. They're continually told that they've got a basis for their grievances. And I think that absolutely came through in the riots. Because you can justify anything if you feel you are the most screwed over generation that has ever lived. And it's completely historically illiterate, which says something about their education, and not least because they are now being educated about the riots in citizenship lessons, and the thing they're being told is that there was a solid basis for grievance. And, well, my son might correct me on that, but that seems to me that the very, very dangerous outcome of the riots, because nobody succeeded in making sense of it in an adult way. We've kind of flattered the people who were the participants.
However the riots and why ever the riots started, I'm interested in the idea that we might be a society that can no longer present any impediments to the escalation of a riot compared with previous societies. I mean, Zoe poured cold water on the idea that traditional media helped perpetuate the rioting. David alluded to a possible role for social media. But there are several things I'm interested to know if the panel think, that seem to me that might have constituted an invitation to continue rioting. Some very quick examples. I'm thinking of, shops shutting just to be safe in the days that followed the initial rioting. Rather than continue trying to present a semblance of business as normal. There was an emergency Google map that had a cartoon flame for everywhere that a riot was rumoured to be happening. A friend of mine in Canada called me in a panic. He thought the whole of London was ablaze because he had seen this map. And there was an infamous YouTube video of a crowd of people running at a line of police, and the police eventually withdrawing in fairly short order. And people panicked, they saw that, and they said, my God, this shows that nobody can hold the line, everything's out of control. So I'm interested in those sorts of things that might have constituted an invitation to continue rioting, and whether we're less able to contain something like that once it starts than a previous society might have been.
I was interested that you were offended by these words, underclass and such like, which I don't like myself, but it was the kind of moral outrage with which you said it. Because I'm a bit obsessed with how offended we seem to be by all sorts of things. And similar to the first point, I think, which has got a racial dimension, I'm interested in the extent to which there is this flattery or an inability to challenge people today and, if you like, offend them by judging them. And I use the Ali G example, which I always thought was fantastic. Ali G used to address quite serious, important people in public life and talk utter crap in a degraded, ludicrous, I'm a black man, you whole bitch, etc., etc. And you'd have these intelligent, quite sophisticated, quite powerful people getting down with Ali, and none of them would challenge him. None of them would say, you're an idiot. Except, and this was like throughout the entire series, so this is over about 15 programs, businessmen, politicians, all sorts of people, until he got to Tony Benn. And Tony Benn just said, which was interesting because it actually showed that he was actually respecting him real because he was challenging him. And he said, you're an idiot. Don't talk like that. You make yourself look infantile. You're better than that. Actually, you shouldn't discuss women or other people. You're just wrong, right? And in the end, Ali G would always do this, the fist pump, with his punter that he was talking to, and they would always fist pump back. And he's still really just taking the piss. And at the end of the Tony Benn interview, he shook his hand. He's the only person. He shook his hand because he actually was thinking, I actually respect you because you're the only person that's challenged me. Now, I worry, if this is senior business people and all the rest of it, how many people especially are prepared to challenge black kids, other kids who are acting like infantile dicks, but aren't actually prepared to challenge them? And that is, I think that, to me, is a serious problem.
Let's just be absolutely blunt. No one would describe David Lammy as politically correct. I think that there is a confusion, a desperate confusion on the left, and the liberal left, that confuses the basis of liberalism, fairness, equality, and then perverts it into a kind of politically correct, a presumption that's about language and absolutely doesn't challenge in the way that you're describing. And it is deeply, deeply problematic, and it's writ large across this country. So I'd want to associate myself with what you have just said. When I said I was offended by a feral underclass, I was simply saying that this desire to separate a group of people and abandon them, I think, is very problematic politically. And actually, they are part of the working class. They are simply workless. That is the fundamental problem that I think needs government and politicians to be brave about. But I think what you're indicating is a kind of cultural malaise that is part of the freedom. You know, when we talk about freedom and the 60s, it's all great. In the end, it's the freedom to do what? The freedom to stab other young children? The freedom to say that your trainer is everything? The freedom to say, is it an in it? You know, there are, both on the right and the left, people that peddle this myth that, you know, is it an in it for an inner city kid is going to get you a proper job? It's not. When I became higher education minister, I questioned why 3/4 of black children in London were at London Met. That was meant to be for the Labour Party progress. It's not progress. It's deeply, deeply worrying. So I'm with you. Thank you very much, brother, for that contribution. I just wish that the left can open up a bigger discussion that doesn't allow this agenda to be totally owned by the right. Because I think that's dangerous, and they can caricature this and have their own agendas when they talk about this subject. Because I've got a feeling that when you're challenging this, you're coming from a different place to your sort of average right-winger when he speaks in that way.
Okay. Frank.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point, which is that historically liberalism, the good bits of liberalism, were associated with the left. I mean, they were kind of, you know, sort of, I'm not talking about political economy and classical political economy, but liberalism had a very powerful left-wing constituency. And then in the recent period, when people think of liberalism, it's got a right-wing kind of connotation to it, and it's got a totally different meaning. And there really isn't anymore that kind of cultural sort of orientation towards sort of the area that used to be the case. And I think that's one of the main challenges, to take that back and to give that a radical, progressive, future-oriented approach. I just want to say something about freedom, in defense of freedom, which is freedom is never a problem. I think freedom is a virtue in its own right, and we should be totally 120% for freedom. Freedom is different than how we choose to exercise that freedom. And the problems that may occur is that if we are unable to give freedom a positive, constructive meaning, then freedom will be the freedom to exploit, the freedom to dominate, the freedom to follow our worst instincts. But it's not the freedom that's a problem. It's the problem is with society, and society's inability to create the conditions where our ability to choose and to be free it has got virtues attached to it. And I think that it's very important to make that distinction, because what has happened in recent decades is precisely because freedom has often been associated with some negative outcomes, some of which Dave has explained, but there are a number of other kind of negative outcomes. People have drawn the conclusion that the way we kind of minimize the negative sort of fallout from this is by curbing freedom, is by regulating freedom and preventing people from having evaluation on that. And I think that's a huge problem. I was in Manchester 2 weeks ago talking about tolerance and freedom. And I couldn't believe this professor, it's a real university professor, gets up and he says to me, I'm sick and tired of Frank Furedi talking about freedom. I'm fed up with freedom. And I really wanted to say, you're saying that, but what if you lose it? What if you lose that freedom? And the fact that he could talk about freedom in that kind of destructive, negative way shows us that we are in danger of confusing what is a really important problem for us.
Just very quickly, look, it's not about. I don't think it's about challenging freedom. But it is about emphasis on freedom to do what? And it is this where we want to place our emphasis? Because actually, when it's not about we're all born free. It's a myth. We are dependent on our parents. We are dependent on teachers that challenge us. We are dependent on fellow workers. It's how we come together. And what I think is coming across here is an accentuation, this hyper-individualized country in which people can be left to flounder and it's fine. That's the challenge that I think people are worried about.
Okay.
Zoe.
Okay. just to take, because I had exactly this argument about whether or not kids have it worse than their parents and whether that's historically illiterate with the person in the prison service who said it's just like a prison riot. Don't dignify it. Historically, no generation looks back and goes, well, I do have it slightly worse than my parents, but I've got it a lot better than my great-grandparents. So the idea that you would think yourself lucky because things over 100 years have improved, but they've got worse in the last 20, I think is asking a bit much of anybody, whether they're 14 or 16 or 60. And I do think this generation does have it worse than the one before it. I mean, just in terms of, but again, we get into the argument about, in terms of their educational prospects, in terms of their EMA, in terms of their employment prospects, in terms of their housing, they do have it worse. It's certainly in the UK, as an 18-year-old who says to me now, we've got it a lot worse than you had it, I agree with them. Because straightforwardly, they have to pay for their education. I never paid for my education. They probably won't be able to afford to carry on in school if they've got no money. That would never have been an issue 20 years ago. That aside, the overarching narrative, I think, is part of the whole mawkish political thing where every time you try and articulate anything that you believe in, it's always articulated in the sense that we're storing this up for our children. So it's like the environmental debate is always framed in terms of like what you're leaving for your children and your grandchildren, which of course is factually correct, but it's not that useful if you're trying to talk about what to do now. All the economic things, how much debt you're leaving for your children, what kind of equality situation you're leaving for your children, it's all framed in terms of a kind of future generation. And I think that's a kind of just a political narrative to justify your point by trying to shunt it onto a kind of object that we all agree is precious.
If you take the structural explanation for why we are where we are, and if you take the cultural explanation, and you're a parent in, say, Wood Green or Tottenham, as a person from Wood Green myself, are you capable of exercising freedom as a parent? In terms of, you might live in a rundown estate, there might be all the structural economic problems that sort of prey in on you. And what I'm trying to get at is the question about the abdication of responsibility, parental responsibility. Why is it that you might have some children or parents who go out and riot and might not be brought up as well as in the past? And so what I'm trying to get at is, do we allow any excuses for parents in working class areas who have it hard? Or is that just an excuse? Now, I want to be very clear, David, because you're contorting your face at me.
I'm actually saying this is a seriously good audience. So
all right, because I'm someone who's not coming from a particularly right-wing position, but I think it's a question that we need to face in terms of freedom, because I'm coming across a lot as a teacher of sixth formers, this sort of excuse culture that, are you calling parents factless? How can you do that, etc., etc., etc. And I'm interested in the balance of how we would approach that, in terms of, do we allow for some structural excuses in terms of high unemployment and poverty or whatever, or do we think that even people in rundown areas need to be challenged?
Just a question to David, really, because you raised this issue, I think it's quite interesting, about why certain areas in the country didn't riot and other areas did, which I think is kind of interesting. You argue that they didn't have the energy to riot, which may or may not be true, but I mean, I have heard a number of competing narratives too. I was wondering what you think of them. For example, nobody rioted in Scotland, it has been cited that maybe there is, for example, a basis for solidarity in Scottish identity or Welsh nationalism as a basis for that. Another thing that struck me again is that there's something different about inner city London or inner cities of large cities and communities such as, say, Merthyr Tydfil in Wales. Or I've read research that the unemployed in northern towns are very different structurally from the inner cities. In social capital debates, it's called having too much bonding social capital, whereby you have a community of people who don't work, and that reinforces that. I just wonder what you think of that.
I just wanted to see if you would pursue this freedom versus equality question a bit further as well, because it seems to me that what you're saying, equality trumps freedom. That's what it sounds like to me in terms of how you posed it. But then I would even say, what does that really mean? Because it seems that when you're saying the problem is the lack of equality, you're talking about the background people come from, their parents, their peers, and their community, and basically seem to be arguing that all of those things are problematic for people, and there needs to be some kind of measures taken to sort out those problems, which then seems to imply freedom goes out of the window because those measures are all instigated by some kind of authority. So I'd like a bit more clarity on that. And then I'd also just like to ask Frank if he could clarify the difference between solidarity and community, because one of the things that did come up in the post-riots discussion was a collapse of community. And I think it would be useful maybe if you could just clarify the difference between the two terms.
I was interested in the question of employment because, slightly to my surprise, all three of you seem to agree that unemployment was a significant problem in all of this. And the question I ask is, if there was a situation of full employment, would that be enough in itself to address the question of full social solidarity that Frank's raised? And the second question I've got is employment an issue? Because Frank seemed to suggest that there was jobs. 15,000 immigrants in Kent have work. So if there is work, what's the impediment to people taking that?
Given the scale of the squeeze on living standards over the past few years, what strikes me is how little unrest there's been, and the demonstrations that have existed have been very unpolitical. Now, of course, it's possible to do a tour of Europe and point to demonstrations in Portugal and Spain and Greece and so on, or to point to the riots in this country and other demonstrations in this country. But the scale is just very, very small and very muted. I mean, I know David is going on the TUC demonstration after this, and we don't know exactly what it would be like. But I did look on the TUC website a couple of days ago, the first time I've done that, ever, I think. And I noticed that on the homepage, it had a message of empathy, not support, empathy, from the head of the Police Federation, saying that, unfortunately, his members weren't free to march on the march itself, on the protest, but his members would be alongside the protest, policing the demonstration. And I think that does give some indication.
Well, they're plebs, of course, so...
I'm not going to comment on plebs, but I think that gives it some kind of indication of the very conservative, unthreatening character of that demonstration as well. So do we really live in an age of unrest?
Whether or not full employment would stop riots, I mean, it would stop riots. That's a given. You do need some inactivity. You need some people who aren't at work to have a riot. But whether or not full employment is a realistic aim for any developed country now, I don't know. But the point is, with the kind of these 15,000 jobs in Faversham and jobs in Pret-a-Manger, and everybody always going, well, where are all the English people in Pret-a-Manger? The fact is, it's not just that English people don't want to do the shit jobs. It's that certainly large corporations and also small employers deliberately don't employ them because they know that they are more likely to lobby for an actual proper contract with 40 hours rather than a 0 hours contract. They know that they are settled, so they might need maternity leave. There's a deliberate bias against employing native people. And Pret-a-Manger has already admitted that after a standard investigation. So if you take that and then you take the kind of in-work benefit system where if you're going to have a very low-wage economy, which I think most people accept that we do have, it doesn't make sense for people to work, certainly not people with children, then you are going to have a strata of worklessness, which is not to do with people being lazy. It's just numbers. I personally think, and the Labour Party is quite good on this, Rachel Reeves is quite good on this, you have to deal with the low-wage economy first, and then everything else will proceed from that. In terms of unrest and flux, I certainly think we're in an age of flux. I don't know whether that means that we're going to have more riots. I don't know whether that means that large demonstrations will turn into riots, but I certainly don't think. I certainly have a sense that things will change more over the next 5 years than they have over the preceding 20. But what will drive that change? Well, I doubt that change will be driven directly by people going to the streets and asking for it.
We're living in very atomised times where, a lot of this discussion has been how we come together, how we empathise, and people can see these things from very different perspectives. But nevertheless, I think we should be deeply worried that the settlement for young people is going to be very different from their parents, as Zoe indicated. I just want to get back to this business of freedom and equality, because I thought that was very well put. The point is this: it's about social capital. And this is underestimated, but is hugely important. Everybody in this room is able to sit still, is able to listen, put their hand up appropriately. People aren't playing around on their BBM the whole time. There is a norm going on that enables us to conduct this event successfully. There are tracts of the population that would find this very difficult. And that is about the social capital that you can be free, but in actually to make your way in this self-deterministic, hyper-individualized environment, which is a product of much of the progress of the 20th century, you do need a lot of skill sets that come together. Employers use that phrase, soft skills, which is a bit sort of not great, but basically it turns out social capital counts for a lot. And it gets back to the point that's been made that, I mentor 3 young men, and one of them did very well at school, straight A's, and is at a Russell Group university. But a lot of the mentoring that I help him with is a lot of the skills. He hasn't got any networks. His hair is in braids, and he wants to work in the city. And I don't think he's ever had a teacher in his life say, do you know what, you're not going to get a job in the city with braids. But that's the truth. Now, I don't know if that's fair or not, but that is the norm. It's the emphasis on social capital and how you gain that capital from teachers, from parents, from community in a society that's placing a hell of a lot of value in that. Never mind racism, discrimination, and all those other things that can affect your path to success. And just to pick up on, just to touch on the question that we had earlier, I do feel that despite the raw deal, actually, for young people vis-a-vis baby boomers, because let's be clear, 60s, baby boomers had it good. On the whole, got your mortgage, sometimes got more than one house, got your education, and had full unemployment for quite a long time. And that is not destined for this new generation. But there is this perversity where there is a culture of entitlement, almost. A presumption that, hang on a minute, this wasn't how it was meant to be. And that then leads to a kind of lack of resilience in the marketplace. So, yes, I enjoy standing up in the House of Commons and giving George Osborne a hard time about the economy and arguing for more jobs and all the rest of it. But I also say to the young people in my constituency, if you're sitting and waiting for George Osborne to give you a job, you're going to have to wait a long time. You need to get up and do stuff for yourself. Set up your own business. You can just go and buy a pair of clippers and learn to be a barber. You can do something. So there's this resilience and this entitlement that we also have to get underneath, I think, in the nature of the society that we live in. If you like, it's the make and men culture that we often associate with our grandparents' generation, who just got on with it in what were very tough times.
Okay, Frank.
I think that one of the reasons why we're struggling, or at least I'm struggling with some of this discussion and some of the concept that we're using, is because when, as I indicated, public life becomes emptied of content, then a lot of the terms that we use, the language we use, just doesn't sound right. And I really hate myself sometimes for using words that I don't feel means what it used to mean, like solidarity. I use the word solidarity in a slightly rhetorical feel about it, and because there are such few examples of genuine solidarity I could point to. Whereas I remember when I was 18 or 19, going down on a picket line, and you see real solidarity of 3 generations of people helping each other out, and just that kind of friendship that would just spontaneously emerge. And I was privileged enough as a 9.5-year-old living through the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, where literally the whole community was at one, where we gave each other food and everybody looked after everybody else. So I know what it is, and I do know that that is something that is conspicuous by its absence, which then means that the terms that we're using are slightly dishonest because it doesn't express a reality that's there. I think that's particularly the case with protest, I used to get a lot of criticism because I made the point that the Occupy movement was not a protest movement. I mean, basically, a bunch of time-rich kids sitting around, looking at their fingers, and with a lot of time on their hands, and just couldn't understand, is this protest where you basically say, I'm making a statement by sitting here, by sleeping on, outside. I mean, if that's what protest has become, then I don't really know what we're talking about. Similarly, when we're talking about resistance, when we're talking about anger, when you actually scratch the surface, a lot of it is really not there. And I think that if you look at the world around us, one of the key challenges that we face is how we give solidarity meaning. Solidarity is not the same thing as community. Communities can spontaneously evolve and become, and often communities are not nice things. They kind of not something that is the accomplishment of the human imagination. They just evolve fairly spontaneously. Solidarity requires a proactive, genuine solidarity. It basically means that I tell David that, for this or that reason, we're going to be together. And that's at least a semi-conscious decision on my part. I think it's the absence of that is the huge problem. And I think we need to get away for a while from the economic or the cultural, all these explanations, and to see that there's something that is neither one or the other. And I like to just end by a little story that I always tell people, which is the one thing that's made the biggest impact on my life. And that was when my kid was 5, we used to go to a karate class, again in Faversham, and everybody went to the same karate class, from the council estates, we got little kind of council estates, to the posh homes down the road, the same karate class. You look at and it was totally mixed, class-wise, culture-wise, race-wise. It was a totally mixed environment. You looked at them when they were 5, and you could see young kids with tremendous imagination, tremendous possibilities, and you couldn't really tell who was who. They were all just going for it, just rearing for it. When I went back there 2 years later, when they were 7, you could already tell that the world has ended for these kids. Opportunities, that was it. You could tell just by the way they were behaving. And for other kids, they will become, they will do all right and kind of move on. And it's that moment that happens in children's lives that is really crucial for us to understand. And that's the area that needs to be thought about by people like us, to see what we can do to make sure that the barriers do not emerge at that point.
I'm interested in changes in the police that were revealed by the riots, because the police set up in the 19th century were concerned with 2 things, public order and theft, to the extent that would be capital punishment for stealing a penny. And what seems to me, in terms of the police, now if you were to tweet something about someone's dad or something, then they'll be round knocking on a door. But really, in terms of dealing with theft, people don't really expect the police to deal with it. So what does that say about, I guess, bourgeois solidarity?
David said that social capital is required, and sometimes people would have difficulty sitting in an auditorium like this and putting their hands up and keeping quiet without playing their BBs. But that seems to me, that goes to the heart of the issue, the idea that on the one hand, we've got a victim culture where victims is the new badge of honour, flattery is done in schools and elsewhere, and the sense of promoting ideas like ambition, achievement, excellence are gone away from. And it seems to me very low horizons, this notion that people can't even conduct themselves in a way that is just called normal behaviour. And people don't even like to say it's normal behaviour. So just a question, in terms of reinvigorating the discussion with ideas about morals and values and excellence, how do we go about doing that without just sounding just like old-wing, right-wing conservatives?
Well, I mean, I'm not a consumer of middle-class guilt, and I've got no problems connecting with normal human beings. And all that I know in my life, the last 3 years, the only place I experienced solidarity is when I watched Spurs playing in White Hart Lane, and that's sad. That is really sad. But I just want to say one little thing. Somebody asked a question about stopping this. Nobody's able to stop it, and I think that's a very interesting question because, in the end, you got the impression that it was people's own exhaustion. They kind of done a lot of running around. They become exhausted, and I thought it was very interesting that a lot of commentators were hoping that it would rain, and somehow the rain would just wash it all away, and that would be the end of it. Which is really the quality of the commentary that we're getting on the discussion at the moment. Which is why I find that this discussion was really quite good because. Even when I disagreed, I thought the comments were quite, really genuinely thoughtful.
Zoe, any final thoughts?
I want to just address my thoughts to the Sandwell lady because I always think this about rich people talking about the politics of envy. I think they envy each other and then they assume that we all envy them. Nobody else does. So, yeah, maybe that... I think maybe you're right. Maybe we're just looking at this very small cadre and saying, well, I'm hyper-individualistic, so everybody else must be. But also, Sandwell really proves my point that it is... And I keep going back to this kind of employment and privatisation of public space and everything. But you've got a brilliant council, and they've got the, Sandwell Community Care Trust. They've got loads of social enterprise. You actually haven't privatised your public space, and it shows... And that's, I think, that does cut across classes and would make a difference in any community.
I think the bottom line in this business at the back about, look, we did it because we can, is obviously to emphasise that in a community like Tottenham, there were 700 on the streets who are the topic of this discussion. 40,000 young people stayed at home. So for those who think that this was just about poverty, they have to answer why so many stayed at home. And for those that think that it's just about criminality, there are questions about why it occurred in certain neighbourhoods, and the key connector in those neighbourhoods is deprivation and unemployment. The truth is most of what's been said today is relevant from the audience and the panel and very important and pertinent. I think the question is why so many people felt that they did not have a stake in this society. And there is something about that shared solidarity, a collective identity, feeling more than just an individual capable of freedom and to do what you want, that is at the heart of that. And then a whole load of issues that cut to why you might not feel that you had that particular state. And just to end on policing, because it is obviously strange that we've had an hour and a half of discussion and the police has not come up as an issue in relation to riots. I do think that the police as a public service find themselves in the midst of this in a very, very difficult way. We have a policing model in this country, policing by consent, not policing by fear, as is the case in France or in America. That consent model is under strain in parts of London. It is deeply problematic that we have 32,000 officers in the Metropolitan Police and only 868 of them are black. We need a police force that looks like New York or LA, or you simply can't police alongside and within community. You end up having to police as a police force.
I'm sure you'll agree it's been a highly illuminating discussion so far. So can we give our panellists a round of applause, please?